Welcome to our Spider-Man recap, where we'll cover everything that happened in Seasons 1 and 2, leading up to Season 3. Let's get started with Season 1, Dawn of Carnage. We are introduced to 16-year-old Peter Parker, a shy and awkward nerd who goes on a school field trip to Oscorp Industries. During the trip, he's partnered up with fellow classmate and genius Gwen Stacy. The two immediately bond over their love of science and each other, wink wink. Whilst inside one of the labs, Peter is bitten by one of the genetically modified spiders. That night, Peter goes home to his Aunt May and Uncle Ben. You know the reason why Peter lives with his aunt and uncle, right? Everyone knows the Spider-Man story at this point. Anyway, Peter doesn't have much to say to either of them as he stumbles up to his room feeling like he's having the worst trip of his life. After hallucinating some giant spiders crawling all over his room, Peter eventually passes out. The next day at school, Peter is confronted by the school bully, Flash Thompson, but this time, Flash's attempt to humiliate Peter goes awfully wrong when Peter suddenly outmuscles him, knocking him to the ground. Where did Peter suddenly get this newfound strength from? I'll tell you where. Spider powers. That's right, the pesky sign spider that bit Peter has given him superpowers. Getting awesome superpowers and not radioactive poisoning, getting revenge on your bully, and dating your crush. Peter's life can only get better from here, right? Wrong! Uncle Ben dies. With his new powers, Peter sets out to find the man responsible for his uncle's death and fight crime, becoming the superhero we all know as Spider-Man. Meanwhile, at Oscorp, pressure begins to build on the company's founder, Norman Osborn, as their stock begins to plummet. But Norman has a brand new secret project that he's certain won't get the company back on track: the Goblin symbiote. Planned on being Oscorp's way of introducing a new wave of super soldiers, giving anyone enhanced strength and skills, as well as a new line of technologically advanced weapons, such as the glider. But due to increasing pressures and tighter deadlines from the company's board of directors, Norman decides to rush the project and go straight to human testing. Using Ravencroft inmate and notorious serial killer Cletus Cassidy as their guinea pig. Thankfully, everything works out in the end, with the Goblin symbiote being a huge success and bringing Oscorp back to number one. Nah, just kidding. The trials are a complete disaster and the symbiote attaches to Cassidy. With the extremely dangerous Carnage now on the loose, Spider-Man gets his first real test as a superhero. Carnage sets out to get his revenge against Norman Osborn, even going as far as attacking the high school Norman's son Harry attends. Spider-Man gets into his first altercation with Carnage, managing to stop his attack on the school before fleeing. Speaking of Norman Osborn, things only get worse for him as he gets fired from Oscorp, but I'm sure he'll take the news well and not become a supervillain or something, right? Anyway, back to Carnage wanting to kill the Osborns. He breaks into Oscorp and begins his hunt, first targeting Harry, who manages to escape, but it doesn't take long before Carnage finds the father and son and immediately goes for the attack. But luckily for them, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man arrives just in time and battles the monster. The fight causes a lot of damage in the building, but I'm sure their insurance will cover it. Eventually, Spidey figures out the symbiote's weakness, fire. Using this, he's able to rip Cletus out of the symbiote. The two, to Cletus's dismay, watch the symbiote burn. Cletus is arrested and taken back to Ravencroft, and the day is saved by good old Spider-Man, or is it? During the celebrations, a certain someone is nowhere to be seen. Norman Osborn rushes back into the building and sets his eyes on the Goblin symbiote. Season 2, A Web of Crime. On to Season 2. Taking place a few months after the events of Season 1, things have gone pretty quiet for Peter Parker. Spider-Man has become a pretty popular figure in the city, his relationship with Gwen is still going strong, and he has a job taking photos of Spider-Man for the Daily Bugle. The same, however, can't be said about the Osborns. Since running back inside Oscorp during Carnage's attack, Norman hasn't been seen since, leaving Harry worried and the future of Oscorp in danger. Meanwhile, powerful businessman and crime lord Wilson Fisk begins his pursuit in becoming the city's mayor. With his enormous wealth, Fisk is able to use it to his advantage, pulling out all the stops in his campaign. But there's one thing that will guarantee his victory. A mysterious figure enters his office with the promise that he can help him win. Norman Osborn, now with green-tinted skin, almost like a goblin. A green goblin. Norman proposes that he and Fisk work together. By having Fisk promise to the people of New York that the goblin serum is now safe and ready to be distributed worldwide and be used as medicine. And what does Norman get out of this? He simply wants the serum spread across the world, creating more like him, because he's an evil bastard, and is tasked by Fisk to keep Spider-Man off his back. With the two now working together, this gives Spider-Man his biggest test yet. But turns out he's not alone. A new masked vigilante has appeared in the city who goes by the name of Daredevil. And boy can he kick ass. He joins forces with Spider-Man in an attempt to bring down Wilson Fisk, but the devil of Hell's Kitchen doesn't quite share the same motives as Spidey. No, he wants to take down Fisk in an act of revenge for killing his father. The two masked heroes work together, with Daredevil focusing on Fisk and Spider-Man focusing on the Goblin. Meanwhile, Harry Osborn, after months of worrying about his father's well-being, finally gets an update on his whereabouts through the news. Hurt and feeling betrayed that his father didn't contact him or let him know about his team-up with Fisk, Harry begins a downward spiral, drinking all day, shutting himself out from his friends. Poor guy, but it doesn't take long before father and son are reunited as the Goblin breaks into Oscorp to grab a few weapons. But the reunion doesn't last long as the Goblin easily pushes his son to the side and makes his escape on the glider. The Goblin doesn't go very far, however, as he sets a trap for Spider-Man by setting a warehouse on fire. Spider-Man, being a trained firefighter, of course, heroically rushes into the building to save anyone inside. He manages to save all the police officers who are trapped inside, including Gwen's own father, Police Captain George Stacy, before he's attacked by the Goblin. The two fight inside the building before a Goblin attempts to fly away on his glider, but doesn't get very far. Spidey tackles him onto a nearby rooftop. The fight continues with Goblin seemingly overpowering Spidey. Luckily, Daredevil was in the area, and he joins the fight. With the two heroes side by side, Goblin manages to clutch the 2v1, holding off both before realizing he'd be better off fighting them one-on-one and escaping on the glider. Tensions begin to boil between Osborn and Fisk, with Fisk's patience beginning to crack as Norman still hasn't stopped Spider-Man or Daredevil. Norman, however, promises that it won't be much longer until the heroes are gone for good. Meanwhile, Gwen visits her father in the hospital after sustaining some pretty bad burn injuries during the warehouse attack, but the nice family moment doesn't last too long. The Green Goblin breaks into the hospital. Man, this dude is just the biggest pain in the ass, isn't he? The Goblin, thinking that Spider-Man must work with the police, attempts to get answers out of George, but it doesn't take long until Spidey arrives. The two fight inside the hospital until Goblin grabs George and escapes. Goblin takes George as hostage to one of Fisk's secret warehouses, where he continues to try and get info out of George, like who Spider-Man's identity is. It's a shame Green Goblin doesn't have mind-reading abilities, or he'd know that George has no idea. Save him a lot of time, at least. Daredevil, who's been quietly gathering info this entire time, appears just in time to save George. The Devil and Goblin fight. During the fight, the Goblin throws a bomb, which attracts the nearby friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. While Daredevil and Goblin fight, Spider-Man uses this chance to rescue George. After securing the police captain's safety, Spider-Man turns his attentions to the Goblin, fighting alongside Daredevil once again, but once again as well, Goblin manages to slip away.
He's a pain in the ass doing that.
I was just gonna say the same thing. It's the big day. The day Wilson Fisk's plan finally takes motion, but there's only one problem. Spider-Man and Daredevil are still on his ass. In an attempt to move things along quickly, Fisk brings an innocent bystander off the street to the lab to use as a test subject for the improved Goblin serum. Oh, hey look, it's Eddie Brock. Spidey and Daredevil use their abilities to sneak into Fisk Tower, which is now on lockdown. Daredevil using Fisk's personal driver's ID to get past security while Spider-Man crawls up to the rooftop. Now, inside of the building, the two finally put an end to the villain's plans. Daredevil easily makes his way through Fisk's security. Meanwhile, Spidey saves Eddie Brock, but before he can help Eddie escape, he is attacked by, I'll give you 3 guesses. Yep, that's right, it's the Green Goblin. The dude is really getting on my nerves. Anyway, the two fight through Fisk Tower, while Daredevil and Fisk also fight. After a pretty 50-50 brawl, Daredevil is able to use his skill and ability to overcome Fisk's power. Now with Fisk defeated, that only leaves Green Goblin. Unfortunately for Spidey though, his fight isn't so simple. Goblin unmasks him, finally learning his identity. After some pretty personal trash talk from the Goblin, Spidey uses the rage to overpower him, and in a last-minute attempt to save himself, the symbiote removes itself from Norman's face. Peter steps back in horror as he realizes that Norman Osborn, a man he respected, was behind everything that's happened. Norman begs and pleads Peter to help him, to cure him from the Goblin, but Peter webs him up and leaves him for the police. But you can never turn your back on an Osborn, especially a Goblin one. As Norman calls in his glider, Spidey senses tingling. Peter manages to jump out of the glider's way just in the nick of time. As he looks back to where it went, he sees Norman impaled and pinned to the wall by the glider. Norman takes one last look at Peter before taking his final breath. Norman Osborn is dead. Daredevil and Spidey reunite as they watch Wilson Fisk get dragged out of the building by the police. The day is saved. And what would Spider-Man be without a final swing? Now sporting a repaired and improved suit made by Gwen, Spider-Man triumphantly swings through the city. We hope you enjoyed this recap of our Spider-Man show so far. Don't forget to check the follow-up, Spider-Man: Shock the System. Thanks for watching.